And we're going to go talk about the highlighted item of the evening, which is the sanctuary state law. What a great deal this is. But really, we're going to talk about the actual law. And it kind of puts a spin on it when everybody decides to rename it, you know, and so they're really referring to SB 54, and there's a companion bill, AB 450. SB means it came from the Senate side of the state legislature, and AB means it came from the Assembly side. And I'm looking at who's here, so I think we're in good shape. But I always start out with meeting norms when we have this kind of a conversation, because sometimes it gets a little heated. But I know you guys look like people that aren't going to create that kind of situation. So what's happened now is the City Council has agreed to discuss the sanctuary city status at the May 8th council meeting. Bob Keller, at a council meeting prior, brought this up. And nobody really wanted to talk about it. Everybody said, oh, we better go and research this some more. Have staff do something and come back and tell me about it. I thought this is really interesting that they're kind of dancing around it. But then at the next meeting that I wasn't there, when a lot more people came down and said, why don't we start talking about this, they decided to put it on the council agenda. So for this meeting, we're going to be I'm going to be asking you to help me through this, because this is really a little different than we normally do, because we want to make sure that we get a good understanding of what's happening. So please wait for the microphone and to be recognized if you want to jump in. And as we go through, if there's something that I didn't explain well enough, you don't understand, probably my fault, so just jump in and ask me again, and I'll do it again. Unlike what I said did anybody read my article about, it was really kind of a fun time. I talked about a time that I was camping at Lake Success in up a ways, and we had some friends there. In those days, you could camp right on the lake, and my buddy said, oh, you know, my daughter's coming down, and look out for her. We're all looking out for her to show her where we are. And she drives by, and I yell at her. And she doesn't really recognize me, so I yell louder. And then all of a sudden, I start laughing at myself because June is deaf. Okay? But I promise I won't do this to anybody here. And that is, it always kind of gets me when somebody tries to explain something, and then when you don't understand it, they say the same thing, only louder. And that doesn't work either, right? So we'll try not to do that. Also, we always ask people, and like I said, I'm looking at the crowd here, I'm sure this isn't a problem, to be respectful of presentation to others. We don't accept in these conversations name calling or inappropriate language. We just won't tolerate it. And by the way, we've had meet and greets with at least 4 congressional candidates, and that's held throughout the whole thing. We haven't had any name calling, and we got to meet them, and it was really cool. So I'm going to kind of do this in like 3 sections. I'm going to start out with some definitions so we're all on the same page, and some constitutional issues, because we're going to talk about how these laws cross constitutional boundaries. And then we'll be talking about SB 54, and then we'll go on and talk about AB 450. And then we're going to have what I call a 360 Q&A. So I might ask you a question, and this is unusual for this group, and you might answer, and then I might ask you a question about your answer, just in a friendly, conversational way, so we can all understand what we're doing. So here's the first one. What is a sanctuary city? Can anybody in this room tell me what a sanctuary city is? Don't all jump up at once. No? Okay.
I read it several times. The SB54 was a sanctuary city. But my English is too poor to explain it.
It's a what now?
My English is too poor to explain it.
Okay. Well, I decided that I would go do and get some definitions for us so we could all be on the same page. It comes also from that article, which was a true story about, I didn't mention the guy's first full name, but the guy's name that I talked about at JPL, the young PhD, was named Steve Flanagan. And we were having a discussion about a particular problem, and the discussion was turning into more like an argument. And Steve recognized that we were talking past each other, so he asked us all to discuss, to tell him what the problem was, what we were talking about. And it turned out that once each one of us did it, we found out we were talking about different problems. And when we focused in our definitions on something that was appropriate, then it became a really good conversation. So the first thing I did was I went to Webster, the Webster's dictionary, and I said, what is a sanctuary? And it just says it's a place of refuge and protection. And it says it's a place where it's immunity from laws attached to a sanctuary. So if a lot of things, it's a place where you go and you pray, and when you're in the sanctuary, you're supposed to be protected. Well, that's Webster's dictionary version. What is the legal definition of a sanctuary? Okay? So I went to a legal dictionary. And in the legal dictionary, it said that a sanctuary is a place of refuge where the process of law cannot be executed. Kind of like the old Western movies that we used to watch, you know, where the guy runs in and then the sheriff tries to barge in behind him and the priest says, nope, sanctuary, you can't come in. But in reality, in the real law world, no place affords protection from arrest for a criminal case. So a little bit different, but that didn't quite sound like what we were talking about either. So I kept on going. And I tried to find the California state definition of a sanctuary or sanctuary city, and I found out the state does not have a definition of a state. Isn't that great? So I found an article in the New York Times, and it talked about the lawmakers in Sacramento debating what it would mean for California to become a sanctuary state with strict regulations over how much our law enforcement agencies could do to help federal immigration authorities. That's the kind of thing that they were thinking about. They didn't know it was, they thought, as you find out later, they were plowing new ground when they in fact were not. So for the purposes of this discussion, can we all accept the definition of a sanctuary as how much California law enforcement agencies will or will not do to help federal immigration authorities? Is that a definition we can all accept? Okay. So now we all know what we're talking about. We're talking about rules and regulations for law enforcement. Those guys that just left, right? So when we start to talk about this, it's important to say, who is responsible for the immigration policy? Who actually makes the policy? Why do they make it? And it comes out of the Constitution of the United States. And I found this article by this lady, Jennifer Calcone. In 2014, she wrote this. And she said, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 4 of the Constitution entrusts the federal legislative branch with the power to establish the uniform rule of naturalization. So it is the federal government that holds the key to who is supposed to be able to come in the country. But that doesn't necessarily put control, give them the full power. We found that many states themselves enacted laws regulating and controlling immigration into their own borders. So even though the feds said one thing, well, the states could come up with other regulations so long as they did not conflict with what the feds said. And it's a fascinating and long article. You can find it on the internet, really great, because it talks about those activities and the Supreme Court decisions over U.S. history. It's a long, long article. But it comes out at the end and it concludes, finally, various states and localities resist particular federal immigration directives, several states and localities have indicated their unwillingness to participate in the Federal Secure Communities Program and have declined to comply with ICE requests to prolong detention of non-citizens pending the transfer to federal authorities. So here the Secure Communities Program is basically the just established sets of ICE coming in and going through different communities and trying to find as many people here illegally as possible. And a lot of states, I guess, have, even in 2014, has started to resist that. So in short, there is a uniform federal immigration law. And even though the Supreme Court, because this comes up before the Supreme Court all the time, they have declared, well, without a doubt, for over a century, that the federal government has the exclusive power to make and control and enforce the law. Those policies and practices throughout the country continue to shape the living experience of immigrants within their jurisdiction. So notwithstanding the letter of the law, federal immigration has always been mediated by the localities and what they wanted to do about it. And that's unfortunate. I think that's part of the whole problem. But that was her conclusion. So one of the reasons why that can happen is because of the 10th Amendment to the Constitution. You know, that pesky little document that we all have to abide by. And what the Constitution says is that the powers delegated to the United States by the Constitution, not prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. So it says, you know what, if we don't say in the Constitution that this is a federal, something that the feds have control over, then either the states or the people will end up making that decision. And realize that the states and the people, and this is going to become more important later, are two different entities. Okay, they talk about state government and talk about people. They're not the same. So the 10th Amendment helps us to define the concept of how we work. We are a union of states. We live in a federalist democratic republic. It's not a pure democracy. It is a democratic republic. And the relationship between the feds and the state government always has to be defined. And remember, when the founding fathers put this thing together, they didn't want to have the feds, they didn't want to have this huge centralized government to control everything. They wanted it to delegate as much as possible to the states. So as the federal activity has increased, the proportion of reconciling the state interest became even more important as they apply to tax, to police, to all different kinds of laws, because nowhere in the Constitution does it give the federal government the authority to do normal policing activities within the states. Okay? So they're two different entities. And that's one of the reasons why when a state would turn around and say, I'm not going to enforce your immigration law as an immigration law itself, they can do that because it's a federal responsibility. They can cooperate if they want to, but if they don't want to, that's another question. So the 10th Amendment was intended to confirm the understanding of the people at the time the Constitution was adopted, that the powers granted to the United States were reserved to the states or to the people. It added nothing to the instrument as originally ratified. That came out of a court. That's a Supreme Court decision, basically saying the same thing. That now we have these different. We actually have authority designated three places. Some places the federal government, some places the state, some to the people. And if you're getting bored with this, it's because I haven't been able to wrap it into what we're talking about yet, but you'll see how it comes into play. But if you don't understand that before we start, it won't make much sense. Okay, so it was clear the 10th Amendment was written to emphasize the limited powers described in the government. And the concept is always when state and local communities take the lead on things, that you're much closer to your elected officials, kind of why I always favor districts, because that would make you closer to your elected officials. And therefore, they're much more, those policymakers are much more accountable to the public. So here we got AB 54, approved by Governor Brown on October the 5th, 2017, authored by De Leon, and it's titled Law Enforcement Sharing Data. It's 8 pages long. I brought it with me. It's not really that hard to read. And but it is hard to find in a mass of paper. So,
You didn't have to bring the whole California Constitution.
no. The whole California Constitution, all I had to do was print the vehicle code, and I would have brought a stack of paper about that tall. Have you ever seen a book of the vehicle code? Printed on little tissue paper, like some of the old Bibles, and they're about that thick. I never knew there were that many to traffic law. Anyway, here is the. This is Senate Bill 50, SB 54, and it's only 8 pages the way I printed it out. I saw online that Stacy must have printed it in bigger print because she got 11 pages, and it amends some sections that were already existing in the California codes, added a chapter, and repealed a chapter. So it was something that was working with things that already existed. But it does not contain anywhere in it. You can read through it, you can search through it, you will not find the word sanctuary. Okay? And I think that's unfortunate, because what happens is what we see, people are retitling these things to be able to try to convince other people of something that's going on or not. So what does SB 54 do? Well, it prohibits state and local law enforcement from holding illegal aliens on the basis of federal immigration detainers or transferring them into federal custody unless they've been convicted in the last 15 years of one of a list of 31 crimes, or they're a registered sex offender, or they may be held on a warrant from a federal judge. So it says, we're not going to not take care of anybody. There are certain situations where we could, and there's a reason why I use the word could instead of will or shall, and you'll understand that in a minute, because the way this law is written, it is typically the way lawyers do things, so they can do almost anything they want with the law. Kind of reminds me of why we all say, what do you think of a bus of lawyers going over a cliff? A good start, right? It's the kind of thing where these guys are always doing things. So they could do that. So when you look at it, let me go find that here, because it makes it sound like we're going to take care of you. Okay. And if that's all it said, we probably would, because it says, these 31 categories, convicted of a serious felony or a felony punishable by imprisonment in state prison, or convicted of a misdemeanor felony within the past 15 years consisting of assault, battery, use of threats, sexual abuse, sexual exploitation, crimes endangering children, child abuse, burglary, robbery, theft, fraud, embezzlement, felony DUI, obstruction of justice, bribery, escape, unlawful possession of a weapon, firearm, explosive device, weapon of mass destruction, possession of an unlawful deadly weapon, felony involving possession, sale, distribution, manufacturing, trafficking of a controlled substance, vandalism with prior convictions, gang-related offenses, conspiracy, crime resulting in death or great bodily injury, possession or use of a firearm during commission of an offense, false imprisonment, slavery, human trafficking, criminal profiteering, money laundering, torture, mayhem, threatening public safety, elder and dependent abuse, hate crimes, stalking, soliciting the commission of a crime, an offense committed while on bail or on release on your own recognizance, rape, sodomy, oral compilation, sexual penetration, kidnapping currently on a California sex or arson registry, conviction of a federal crime which meets the definition of an aggravated felony. So that's a lot of crimes, right? I mean, you would think we're going to be just the safest people in the world. I thought so until I kept reading. So realize that's what they're saying. And if the law would have stopped here, probably wouldn't have got people so excited that actually read it. But it says that, you know, those 31 crimes, or any other crime where there's a warrant from a federal judge. Well, what else does it do? It prohibits state and local law enforcement from asking anyone about their immigration status. And now we're getting into the area where the state does not want to enforce just immigration laws. So they're saying you can't ask anyone about their immigration status because, you know, could very well be that you got someone off on the side of the road for some whatever broken taillight, and you say, well, are you a legal citizen? And they say no, and off you go. They don't want that to happen. So then they said it prohibits the state and local law enforcement from sharing any information with federal immigration authorities that is not available to the general public. Anybody remember that nice lady from Orange County, that sheriff from Orange County? You heard her in the news? Where she published her entire list of people in detention in the paper? Well, she complied with the law. You know, everything that she did was available to the public. So there's another way. She just looked at it and she said, I can get around this law, no problem, because it's right in the law, right? Prohibits state and local law enforcement from using their money or personnel to investigate, interrogate, detain, blah, 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 for solely immigration purposes. And so here again, we're talking about all those things that it would be like just doing general raids through businesses or something, just trying to pick up illegals. Prohibits state and law enforcement from allowing federal immigration authorities to use their space in their facilities. Watch how that gets hampered a little bit. Again, they don't want to take place in. They don't want this to take place where they are handling just straight immigration activities. Limits how and when state and local enforcement can contact with the immigration authorities. Well, we already know that. But then they put in this kicker. And that's the part that just all of a sudden, when you look at it, you go, grants discretion to the state and local law enforcement to cooperate even less with federal immigration authorities than the bill authorizes them to, but not more. That says that a law enforcement agency cannot participate with them at all. Right? Is that what it says? They just took away everything that they said they were going to do. And like I said, that's why we like to see that bus of lawyers going off the cliff. So then they come around and go backwards the other way. It said, notwithstanding limitations that you just heard, this section does not prevent any law enforcement agency from doing any of the following that does not violate any policy of the law enforcement agency or local law or policy of the jurisdiction to which the agency is operating. So I guess Santa Clarita could pass an ordinance that says you can't do, and then they can't do it, right? Or the sheriff department could write a policy. And that's one of the things that I don't know. And I didn't think, I'm going to cut that out of the video because it was not a fair question. I did not think that gentleman knew the answer. So, so notwithstanding, but you still can, if it doesn't violate anything local, investigate, enforce, detain on reasonable suspicion or arrest for violation of Section 1326, Title 8 of the United States Code. Now, everybody knows what that is, right?
Re-entry after deportation.
Well, that's because I added that in. So, because that wasn't in the bill, right? So what it is it says if you have somebody that has been previously removed, you can go back and you can do it again. Transfers to immigration authorities are permitted. Respond to a request. You're allowed to respond to a request from immigration authorities for information about a person's specific criminal history. Okay. You're allowed to conduct enforcement or investigating duties associated with a joint law enforcement task force, including sharing confidential information with other law enforcement agencies for the purpose of task force investigation, so long as the following conditions are met. The primary purpose of the joint task force is not immigration enforcement. So if you are on a task force for drug enforcement and you come across some illegals, that's okay. The enforcement and investigation duties are primarily related to violation of state or local law unrelated to immigration enforcement. Participation in the task force by a California law agency does not violate any law or policy which it is otherwise subject. Making inquiries into information necessary to certify an individual has been identified as a potential crime or trafficking victim, and giving immigration authorities access to interview an individual in agency or department custody. So there are things that they're saying you can do, and there are a lot more details in law. Law indicates that local law enforcement reporting activities, it puts boundaries on what you need to report to the Department of Justice if in fact you're as a part of one of these task forces. It says that the Attorney General, by the middle of this year, will be publishing some model policies for us all to follow because we're not smart enough to write them ourselves. And there is a restriction on ICE interviews with individuals on department custody related to civil immigration violations and the state reimbursement to local agencies. So the local agency will be trying to recoup money back to the state. So what I did was I went into the article, and I'm not going to say who made these statements, even though you may recognize them or you might have made them, but it came out in the Gazette. And what I thought about was, in some cases, maybe everybody wasn't aware of what was going on. I wish Stacy was here because Stacy asked a question, and I think it's a valid question. She said, what would SB 54 do to our community? And I'd have to tell her, I don't know, because I don't know what the local law enforcement, how close law enforcement is going to push it right to the limit that they can do, or whether they're going to say, I'm not going to do as much. And for our local law enforcement, we're a contract city, but the major policies for the Sheriff's Department are not set at our City Hall. They're set by the elected LA County Sheriff. Now, we of course have some bargaining position in this. We pay them, and we're about to give away $32 to $40 million to help build a new sheriff's station. So there's some bargaining that we could have in there, but we don't even know what the sheriff policy is. So that's going to be certainly one thing that we might ask at the next city council meeting, if you think it's appropriate. So let's talk. We'll look at what some supporters have to say, and we'll look at what some opponents have to say, and then you tell me what you think, okay? Because I'm just me. So if you object, as one person said, if you object to a sanctuary state law, you're making it harder for police to do their jobs. What do you think? No? No. You know, if you were reporting everything to ICE, to me, what would happen is you would have people that were arrested, and when they were arrested, you'd look on the detainer list, and if they were detained, you'd notify ICE. That's all you'd have to do. Now what you got to do, if you comply with every piece of this law, you got to go through and validate whether they meet any of those conditions that are you're supposed to talk to ICE, and so I don't think it makes it harder. I think it makes it. I think that this law it makes it harder because you have more things you have to deal with. What do you think? Do you think if you object to the sanctuary state law, you invite opportunities for racial profiling? And why is that? Tell me. Oh, I want to hear. I really do. Honestly, I won't. Come on, Diane. Tell me why.
Let me go back to the first one for a minute.
Okay.
Making it harder for police to do their jobs was identified by Darrell Bates in Special Order 40, which is why he put that into that law at the time. He said that police need to be able to work within communities, and if they're working in minority communities and they're trying to protect everybody in the area, not just the minority communities, which are normally, high sites for criminals, attacking those people, attacking those communities. The police can't do their jobs because those people will not talk to them. They can't find the criminals. They can't stop the victimization of people. That's one of the things that he identified, and that's been, the policy of the police department since. LAPD's had that policy since 1979.
Well, you're speaking of, if I'm looking at the SB 54, you're only talking about one part of SB 54. You're not talking about the whole thing. You're talking about the part where your local law enforcement will not go out and attempt to rid the community of illegal aliens. The other part of SB 54 is people that are already arrested. So for those people that are already arrested, how does it make us any safer, or how does it make the police job any easier not to just send them off? I mean, I understand what you said about the first part.
They're required to notify ICE if those people have a criminal record or if there's a violation. They're required to notify ICE in those systems.
Not by this law.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I worked for the INS I was an immigration agent for 15 years.
Okay.
We never ever asked the PD to enforce immigration laws. This all has to do with that detainer. They don't want to recognize that detainer. And all INS ever asked the police to do it was all done through the county jail. Because the immigration as a whole, when I started in 74, we used to work the streets. We did our own thing. The only time we ever asked the PD to help us, the locals, is if we needed backup as far as traffic control. Because they have no authority. They don't know an alien from one. I mean, they used to bring us guys that were wearing sombreros and think they had an illegal alien. The biggest problem LAPD used to have, and I think it's changed, they didn't speak Spanish. So they couldn't communicate with the city, with the locals. The other thing is the communities don't trust the police. If you're from Mexico, you believe the police are evil. I mean, they don't get anything good from their police department, usually. Now that's how you can't say that blanket. The only thing we did is we used to work in the county jail. They would let us, we had a desk there. I used to do it for 12 hours a day. And we would sit there, and if we saw somebody we thought was illegally in the country, we'd put a hold on them, a detainer. And in that detainer it says, I'm an immigration agent, I've interviewed this man, he's an illegal alien, when you're finished with him, we want him. And it actually, there were so many in the county jail that we started just doing what we call CIMTs, they're criminal or crimes involving moral turpitude. Burglary, robbery, rape, all the stuff you named there. When they finished with them, they don't give them back to the PD, they don't send them over to the local sheriff department to release, they go back to the county jail. And they would call INS, where I work, we would go over and we'd pick up the ones we had detainers on. Now it all has a lot to do with money, because they don't want to hold them. Once they're finished with their state rap, they want the federal government to pay for as long as they keep them after that. They want them to pay for transportation, and it's all money, believe me.
So, all right, so I think, I think part of the discussion, I think part of having the discussion is, instead of just saying, I object to or don't object to a sanctuary state law, you really should talk about what part of it that you think is beneficial. Obviously, I think what you just told me too is that you think it's beneficial not to do that in doing community policing, but it is beneficial to turn over the criminals. I think that's what you said. So,
But they can't do it off the street. They can't go down and say,
I agree.
yeah, I'm picking you up
I
for
agree.
burglary and you're an illegal alien.
I agree. I agree.
They never did.
So you really are telling me, I think, you're really telling me that you don't particularly agree with a sanctuary law in its entirety, that anybody that's here illegally should be let go. You're talking about a particular segment, and I don't have a problem with that. I just think that sometimes when we start having these discussions and we make this thing too broad, then it doesn't work. Yes, sir.
I think what a lot of people in particular, this for me in particular, is when I look at people is my biggest thing is, are you here my biggest issue is not, are you here documented or are you here non-documented. My biggest thing is, if you're a police officer, you should not, my opinion, is if you're going to be getting arrested, my key issue is not, are you here as a documented individual? What are you being arrested for? Those 31, right? 31 issues. If that is what they're going to be turning you over to ICE for, those are going to be that's going to be what you are going to be getting, you're arrested for and so on, and what you will be getting, possibly the end result, deported for.
Mm-hmm.
But if you are not part of those 31 issues, my biggest issue really is not if you're legally into this country, if you are contributing, if you're a non-harmful citizen, non-harmful individual in the States. That's really not my key issue. And another issue is, like, when it comes to racial profiling too, is, in my opinion, this really does open up the doors to racial profiling, because a lot of people think, illegal immigration is Hispanic people. Like a lot of during the election was, build the wall, because this is where a lot of illegal aliens come from, because that's where they all come. A lot of undocumented immigrants are not from Mexico.
That's correct.
One thing they're trying to do is convince the public that crossing that border is not a violation of law. It is. It's a USC. It's a criminal federal statute. When you cross that border, you, even as a citizen, you have to come through a port of entry. You have to be inspected to come in. The only people that can cross that line without in a place that isn't designated by the federal government, our government, are Indians, American Indians, because they can go anywhere in North America. But if you're a Mexican citizen, you cross that border, you've committed a violation of the law. And they're trying to downplay that to the point where, it doesn't mean anything. Well, you're still a criminal.
Well, yeah, I think that's true. I think that isn't really true, but I think the problem is, and remember, I started out, I related this back to the city. Remember, I kind of related this back to the city, where the city would take and pass an ordinance and nothing changes, and then 5 years later they come and grab you for it. That's the same kind of thing that's happening to a lot of people now. They have, for the last 40 years, the government, our United States government, has not been enforcing the borders and have allowed all these people to come here, which just says, you know what, I can do it because no one cares. And now all of a sudden, I can see where it's going to be a big issue, because you're now going to try to do this for people that have been here for I don't know how long. And I would ask, I think I said it in one of the other podcasts I was on with Stephen Daniels, I would think that there ought to be a statute of limitations on that.
Laws, the naturalization of laws. If you've been here 20 years and never left the United States, I think it's 20 years, you can apply. You can go right down to the INS and say,
Okay.
I lived here for 20
Right.
years. I came illegally and here I am, and I want to now become first you have to become a permanent resident.
Okay, well,
Become a citizen. You have to be a permanent
So I think we've, yeah, I think I think what we've really done is instead of saying sanctuary, no sanctuary, I think we've been talking about degrees of compassion that you would have for one group as opposed to another.
Well, let me tell you one thing, when they bring them across the border, they used to just bring people over. Now they're carrying backpacks, and they were smuggling drugs in them. I mean, that's why the Border Patrol's down there, and they'll have DEAs down on the border.
Well, the war on drugs is a whole other issue, and
Yeah, but it's mixed.
but yeah, I
It's
understand.
them to cross the border.
I understand.
The same guy that's bringing the people in is bringing the product in. He brings it with him. Now, that doesn't make everybody bad, and, but they're giving INS a really bad rap right now. They make it sound like these ICE agents are going out and just indiscriminately knocking on doors. Mostly, or 90% of the people they're picking up, they've already had an immigration hearing. They've seen an immigration judge who's a federal judge. He works for the INS. Yes, they have.
There's a backlog, there's a huge
It's-
backlog, and the cases are 2 and 3 and 5 years behind.
That's because
There
they
are no
couldn't
judges.
find them. The immigration judge would order them deported. They didn't take them into custody. They would go home. They'd never come back. Well, 10 years later, that warrant's still good. It's like an arrest warrant for anything else, for any other crime.
But what,
And if
what
you have
people-
one on you, you aren't ever gonna get away from it. It's,
what people are being told, though, from people from the federal government is that people are being provided notices that they're supposed to appear before the judge and they're not showing up. In fact, they are showing up, but there's a backlog because we're 100 judges short.
Well, okay. I think we're getting off topic. I think we're getting off. I think the big thing that at least I just found out.
do with, though, is that detainer.
Well, I think everybody.
They're people.
I think I'll bet everybody in this room would agree that for those people that have been convicted of crimes or been reentering numerous times, should go. And where we're talking about compassion is we're talking about those individuals that are living quietly and but at
What do you do about the ones for drunk driving, for instance? Hit and run. How about vehicle violations? Do they?
okay.
Well,
How about the statement?
Exactly, if that crime, if we did that crime, we'd be in jail. You know, so,
According to
no.
that list, it did say.
Which crime?
Yes,
And according to that list.
Well, not if they don't turn you over to immigration.
And it said you would be.
That's what it says, that you're supposed to turn them over.
Turn them over according to that list.
But the
same
question
way that-
is the detainer, are they gonna recognize the detainer that they always have? Now they're saying you have to have an order from a federal judge, right? And the question is, are they
Well,
saying you can have an arrest warrant for
well,
immigration?
well, hold on. Now, according to SB 54, if we ignore the clause that says you can do less than what you're supposed to, they will accept detainers for those 31 categories of crimes.
So they're releasing them right now. They release them up.
Well, yeah, I don't know what they're doing right now. I'm only talking about the law and what we want to go ask our council members to do. Certainly, I would ask the council members to make sure that every one of those guys that I would like to hear out of our captain that every one of those guys that they have that had this kind of a criminal record was detained for ICE.
Tell you, he has no idea.
there's, when they arrest people, that they pull over, they get their criminal history when the police officers look it up.
Yes.
That goes under your title there of general information that is used, and I believe.
But they don't want to recognize a detainer. They want a warrant from a federal.
Well, I heard that. I heard that, and you know, I've heard people talk about that. That's I've heard people talk that way, but I'm only reacting right now to what the law that they're talking about is. So if in fact this thing says that they will not honor a detainer unless, and then it goes through the 31 crimes. So if you ignore the one paragraph that says, well, we can do less if we want to, and you think everybody's going to do the maximum amount, then they could do that, yes.
Now, go back to that paragraph that's highlighted, that's they can do less paragraph. Can you go back to that, please? not one. I can imagine that there could be a situation where state or local law enforcement have an investigation going on and they need to detain somebody and hold them and not turn them over to ICE because they are trying to work on a case.
Well,
So that's open to interpretation.
well, that could be, that's a possibility, but that is not what it says. It says if I was a local law enforcement guy and I decided I just didn't want to do it at all, I could do it. Well, that's what it says. That's what it says. Don't, I'm trying not to read into this. Don't read into it. Just accept what it says. And I mean, one of the things that I would think that you would go and talk to Keller and the rest of council is saying that paragraph's got to go.
If you're arrested in Santa Clarita, though, if you commit a crime here and they're gonna hold you over, if the only way they'll release you out of this jail is if they decide not to prosecute you. If they decide to prosecute you, you're going to county jail.
Yes.
And once you're there, can you imagine they're not gonna use any discretion? They're telling them, don't take any.
Well, this doesn't have to do with it has to do with no, because what happens isn't this what happens? It is that the person is getting ready for release, and they look to see if there's a detainer on them, and they're only going to look for a detainer if that person had been convicted in the last 15 group of crimes. Yes, back there.
But nobody is released from a county jail within the city limits, because all county jails are outside the city limits.
Yeah, well, it's gonna have anything to do with Santa.
Well, all right. We can. I think there's two things now. I think one thing is I think everybody will agree that paragraph's got to go, and the second thing is that we need to know what our sheriff's policy is.
Right, the county is more involved in this than the city would.
Nobody in LA County has yet to come up and.
If you arrest somebody in Santa Clarita, they're gonna go to the county jail where they're released from prison. If they go to prison, they go back to county jail to be released. We'll never see them here.
All right.
Now,
Yeah.
another thing, the LA County Sheriff worked with the state on this bill. He didn't like it at first. They made changes to it, and he's.
You know what? I've heard that too, and I've seen the articles in the paper that said he was opposed to it. I've never seen an article in the paper that said he accepts it. If you got one, I'd like to see it. Perfect. Okay. Perfect. So if he likes this, and if he agrees that paragraph in red is not something he's going to do and do less, then we're well, he's an ultimate. What?
I don't think he's going to let deputies do whatever they want.
Well, we'll see. Well, I know I'm not suggesting that. I just want to know what his policy is.
I don't think the deputies will have anything to do with any of this.
So, do you think
The county jail and what
the county jail reports to the county? The county jail reports to the sheriff, the LA County Sheriff. So they're the ones that are going to set that policy.
And Orange County so far, I think, is the only one that said, we're gonna give a list of everybody that's incarcerated at the end, and if you have your detainer, you can recognize any.
Right. Orange County just, right. Orange County, right. I said that. Orange County just publicized the list. They publicized the list, and when they publicized the list, they complied with the law, and they gave them all the information.
The only reason they're doing that is because they want INS to pick those people up.
Well,
And the state won't let them do it. They're basically saying, don't honor detainers, don't contact them.
I understand. I hear you. I know. I'm just trying to reflect what the bill says. They did that. Now, other supporters have said that by discussing this at a city council meeting, our city council has declared war on dreamers and immigrant families in Santa Clarita. Do you guys believe that?
Oh, they're
No,
turning
that's
it
not
into
true.
a right or wrong.
We're not talking about law-abiding, tax-paying citizens. We're talking
Okay.
about criminals. We're
Okay.
talking about people that are drunk driving. I'm sorry, we can't do that. They shouldn't do it. Drug-related crime, sex-related crime. That's what we're talking about. People that get arrested for those things.
I agree. So you don't agree with that either? Okay.
And if that's all we're talking about.
Nobody wants. Does anybody want to defend that statement? Yeah, go ahead.
I have a question for you. So everything you just stated were part of 31 things that said they would get deported for.
Right.
The exact same thing that if I got a DUI and killed somebody, I would go to jail for.
That's
And
right.
I would be in 10 years in prison for, and I would be programmed and have a breathalyzer in my car.
That's right.
I have a friend who just got a DUI, so I would, what they would get deported for. None of us want criminals on the, violent criminals on the street.
That's right.
Correct? Which is what those 31 things are.
No,
The-
it's felony DUI.
Yes.
Felony DUI, I'm sorry.
Means that you killed somebody.
Holding criminal standards to those standards, including dreamers and undocumented immigrant families. Anybody who crosses that border is a criminal in your standard.
Well, because they're not here legally. I have a brother-in-law that lives in Sweden and came to the United States. It took him 3 years to get here.
I know, so
Okay?
this is what I'm
He didn't
saying.
walk across the border with my sister, who's an
But
American citizen.
anybody who's here, anybody who overstays their visa, anybody who,
Well,
not
they
even
need
a
to
border.
take care of those.
Actually, the number of people that overstate their visa are a fair number.
Including your own Congressman, Steve Knight, his wife had to go through immigration services. I remember him saying, you were going to sleep on those.
But we're getting off topic. Please, let's talk about this law. All right. Please, let's talk about this law.
If they weren't trying to do something, he wouldn't have written this big pile of whatever that he wrote, and he wouldn't have thrown that little clause in the bottom, because you
Right.
could get rid of that whole top part of it, and it wouldn't affect anything, but that little one at the bottom, that one you had in red that said,
Yeah.
we can do anything we want if we decide that's what we want to do.
Well, I think some of the thing that was,
It would be a sanctuary city
right.
if they didn't, what would they do it for?
Okay, so, I think the one that was most interesting to me, and I agree that I kind of edited this up, was if the federal immigration policy went after people like the sex offender illegally in the country who assaulted a teen in Saugus, it would be easy for me to stomach. Well, in that particular case, that person would have been one of the ones deported because they would have had violated that law. So let's go to some that by those opposed to the law. Oh, well, I guess these were the people that supported the law. The people that oppose the law says it's nearly universally recognized and described by both its supporters and opponents as a sanctuary state law. You guys agree with that? I agree, we hear that all the time, but I think that hurts the discussion. They think the law protects illegal aliens at the expense of citizens, which will increase illegal immigration to California. Anybody got an opinion?
Yeah, so I think it's true. Why wouldn't you?
Keller write those
That's a no-brainer.
bulletins for you?
Yes, back
Keller
there.
write those bulletins for you?
Huh?
Did Bob Keller write those?
No.
It does
No,
sound
but-
like something he would say.
Well, I want one from income tax. This is
Right.
immigration. I want them to say, okay, you're here and income tax is just too hard on you, so don't pay it, because you know what the heck, you don't want to pay your taxes, then don't pay them. It's a federal law and you're poor and you don't need
We
to.
don't want to be hard on your family.
So I'm beginning to feel like
Anything except criminals getting out of the county jail.
we don't have very many meetings like this. This is really cool. I kind of like it in a way, kind of fun. I kind of get the idea that the opinion of SB 54 is that people like parts of it and they don't like other parts of it.